So hello everyone. This is a presentation about Presto, which is a fast SQL-on-Anything engine, and it can query Data Lake, Snowflake, Elasticsearch, and much more. I'm happy to take you through this presentation today. So I'll touch on what's Presto and then Starburst, which is my company sponsoring this project. I will then discuss our recent Delta Lake integration. If you're a Databricks user, you are more than likely using Delta Lake storage, and we will discuss how we natively integrated with that table format. Then I would like to zoom out for a bit and tell you more about the data platform architecture as we see it, and how Spark and Presto and other technologies fit together and deliver most of the value for your data processing. And then I will cover use cases that we often see among Presto users and Starburst customers. Okay, so on to Presto and Starburst. So Presto is obviously an open source project driven by the wide community. In its core, it's basically a high performance parallel SQL engine. It speaks ANSI SQL, so it's very much compliant with all the traditional SQL statements you might be using. It's focusing on interactive, very fast SQL processing, unlike some of the engines like Hive and Spark, which are more geared towards batch processing. Presto is proven at scale. It runs at hundreds and thousands of machines at major companies in the world, and it's been around for over 8 years by now. So it's really proven already in some of the most demanding use cases you may have. And the other focus, in addition to interactive query speed, is also high concurrency. So you can fire tens and hundreds of Presto queries at the same time and see the system handle that very well, which is also in contrast to sort of Hadoop-born SQL processing that you may be familiar with from the past. One really important design point for Presto was separation of compute and storage. It was really initially done to allow Presto to connect to many different storage engines. But really, the benefit of that is beyond just this federation capability. It actually makes Presto very well suited for running in the cloud and cloud-like environments, which is maybe not something that people were that much concerned about 8 years ago, but now right now this is basically a super important feature for everyone. Because of the separation and SQL compute being separate from storage, Presto can run beautifully across many different storage engines. I will discuss some of the federated query use cases in this presentation later on. Another aspect of Presto is it's actually very easy to deploy anywhere. So there are many customers and Presto users leveraging Presto on traditional on-premises clusters, on bare metal, increasingly, and that's also on-premises Kubernetes deployments, and obviously cloud is a major environment for deploying Presto as well. So it can be actually deployed pretty much anywhere, including some of the hybrid environments as well, which is really cool in the modern world where many customers have really data spread across many environments, and there are sometimes cloud, sometimes on-prem. Very often it's a mix. So that's really powerful. So who are some of the biggest Presto users? It all started at Facebook in the early days, and was very quickly adopted by companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, and Netflix. And I think just spreading this really powerful engine initially in Silicon Valley, and then expanding to the rest of US and then globally, I think make Presto really powerful. So we now see big open source users such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Lyft, and many others, as you can see some names on this slide. And then increasingly over the years, as Presto matured and was able to handle more complex use cases, we saw the benefits of Presto being leveraged by larger enterprise companies that increasingly were faced with similar challenges as internet scale companies in the early days, which is like data is really measured in petabytes. It's diverse, it's spread across many sources, and you really want to run powerful SQL analytics over the data. And you can see some examples of like how big Presto clusters, what kind of concurrency people may have. Often it's into hundreds of thousands of queries a day, and it's just really proven at that scale already. So here at Starburst, we are the biggest sponsor of the project. We actually currently employ all major contributors and committers to the project. I think we are responsible for over 80% of all the code that was already written to date for Presto. We are still investing heavily in the open source community. It's super important for us to be able to drive the project forward, make sure that it realizes the vision of running interactive, highly concurrent analytics across your big data in sort of this fully separated open source manner. As a company, we were born 3 years ago. In that short period of time, we experienced really tremendous growth and serve over 100 enterprise customers by now. And the focus is obviously, as I mentioned, which is the open core Presto with all the values of fancy SQL and flexible deployment, high concurrency, and offering the value of rapid time to insight, minimizing your need to do expensive ETL just to do initial investigative analysis, lowering cost of running the queries at scale, and sort of adding enterprise-grade security and expertise in supporting you to make you more successful with this technology. So the major features we focus on in Starburst is really investing in performance. Performance is really important aspect of every single SQL engine, because performance really means lower cost, especially if you're running in a cloud, and even if you're running on premises. Being able to run more queries means you have more value for out of analytics. So it's really cost that you're winning when investing in performance. Additional features, Presto comes with a number of connectors to different data sources already out of the box in the open source. However, we have some enterprise additions like connectivity to IBM DB2, to Teradata, to Oracle, Snowflake, etc. And then security, there's built-in security in Presto already, but if you want to get, so fine-grained access control, data encryption, masking, auditing, and this is what Starburst can help you with. And then any tooling around management, monitoring, configuring the clusters, and simplifying the deployment. And then finally, obviously, we are the leading expert in Presto itself. We employ both all the major contributors as well as the original creators of the project that came to us from Facebook. And we really can stand behind the project, support it, and sort of continue to harden this to serve you better in your enterprise environments. And some of the customers that we serve are really spread across many different industries. Lots of companies in tech, as you can imagine, Slack, Tesla, GrabHub, lots of leading global finance companies and banks, retail. So Zalando out of Germany is one of our biggest customers, and lots of media companies, healthcare, and really everywhere in other industries. So it's widely deployed at large scale at leading organizations in the world, and we just strive to make it even simpler and more powerful to more of the customers. Okay, so with that background on Presto itself and Starburst, I would like to discuss a little bit more on how we view the storage piece, which is not something that Presto handles natively, but really integrates with a variety of options in this market. And so Delta Lake, that's obviously an open source project created by Databricks, and I think it was really powerful addition to the way storing the data in data lakes and object storage. Right, the key feature brought really was ACID properties over object storage. Being an open source project and leveraging Parquet file format and object storage scalability and cost efficiency, I think it really brought this fundamental capabilities that enterprises needed out of data lakes, but couldn't get with the original Hadoop storage. The other cool things in Delta that we really like is schema evolution, time travel, and really what impacts performance a lot on top of just Parquet is fast and object storage is efficient. However, having really detailed metadata and statistics at the metadata level really allows us to run the same queries against the same Parquet files in the end, but with much better performance due to advanced data skipping and being able to leverage partitioning and geoordering and other features is really super cool. So really thank you for Databricks, and we work a lot with engineers from the Delta Lake project to build our integration for that in Presto. So that effort really started from our interest. Well, if Delta Lake is really a bunch of Parquet files and Presto can read them no problem today, right? Like what's natively available in Delta that we could leverage to make that those queries even faster, right? And after talking to the community and to the Databricks engineers who are behind the project, we really realized that we should really create like a native connector for Presto that's written from scratch, and it allows to leverage those features that are beyond just being able to read Parquet. So we support reading the Delta transaction log directly. We parse this information. We inform how we should, which files we should read, and how we should help leveraging this metadata that's available there and to skip data, reading the data, right? Some files may not even contain information that's needed for a given query. So all those min-max indices, etc., help us a lot. We leverage, in addition to that, we leverage dynamic filtering in Presto. So if we have derived predicates, we can compute at runtime. We'll be pushing this down and support further data skipping based on the Delta metadata and information. And then the statistics itself are super useful for really optimizing the query plans, right? So we are able to reorder joins in a Presto query based on the sizes of the tables, and all the available statistics help us to understand, should this be a broadcast join, should this be a distributed join, and that way we are able to get even faster performance. So when we developed this native Delta Reader connector for Presto, we ran some of these standard benchmarks like TPCH internally to really realize, well, it's great we can speed this up at the table scan level, but what about the overall workload, right? And what we saw was really encouraging numbers. So some of the queries were as fast as 6 times versus just reading the same Parquet files without Delta Lake metadata. And the overall across 22 queries defining this benchmark, we saw average speed up of 2x, right? Because the queries actually compute your joins and do a lot of complex operations. You obviously cannot save that part, but the table scan was vastly improved. So we were super happy with that. What we were even more impressed with was that when we deployed this release and this connector to some of our customers that are leveraging Delta Lake today, they were actually able to see performance boosts, 10x or more on some of the workloads, thanks to data skipping and really more efficient processing. So that was really powerful to see the benchmarks that really reflect some of the workloads customers are running, and we can even get better performance than that. So now just let's zoom out for a bit, and well, someone has Databricks, someone has Presto, how to really mix all those technologies together, right? And in this talk, I promised to discuss how we also interact with Snowflake, Elasticsearch, and other tools. So our vision for the data platform, where Starburst builds and Presto is at the core, is really shown in this diagram. So your end users, whether they are data analysts, data scientists, and from whatever departments, whether it's finance or marketing, they're really not changing their interaction pattern, the way they interact with the data. They are still in front of the BI tools, SQL editors. Like the examples include Tableau, Looker, Power BI, Click, etc. They can obviously leverage just typing the SQL directly if they need to. They can leverage Python and other tools to issue those queries. And at the end, the SQL statements that are generated by those tools or typed in are sent to the Presto, which is the core of our data consumption layer. And we will process that. We'll take care of all the computation that's needed, and we'll apply all the security rules like data masking, encryption, auditing, and access control down to the column and row level, and really allow you to leverage the power of all the data that you have in your ecosystem, right? The vast majority of the data may live in your data lakes, in Hadoop, whether that's on-prem or cloud. We support all sort of Hortonworks, Cloudera, MapR distributions, and all the leading cloud Hadoop deployments in Azure Blob Storage, Azure ADLS, and S3, and Google Cloud Storage, and then object storage on-prem is growing as well. So we can tap into Red Hat Ceph or IBM Cloud Storage or Dell EMC, Minio, and a bunch of S3 compatible object storages that you can deploy yourself. And Delta is one of those recent additions where it's really just an extension of that vision. And there are more storage formats and table formats that are coming to Presto to really help you get most of that ability to store inexpensively large amounts of data, and then expose that to analytical engines like Presto. But then not all the data lives there, right? So in many of the enterprises, you have also relational databases, whether that's Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, or maybe that's a data warehouse, like from Teradata, from DB2, from Snowflake, Oracle, Redshift, BigQuery. I guess I don't see it on the slide. Or Azure Synapse. All of those are supported as well by Presto. So you may keep some of the data there and still be able to access that through Presto. And then, interestingly, you can also query data that's wasn't meant to be queried by SQL originally, like MongoDB or Elastic, Cassandra, Redis, and others. And then Kafka and event logs are also supported, right? So you really may tap into all the data that you have in your organization and run SQL statements across all of those and mix and match, correlate information, and get most value out of this. Given there are so many different tools and technologies for running SQL these days, one may wonder, like, why do I leverage the power of all of them, right? And our view is that in most of the cases, they actually very nicely complement each other. Certainly Spark and on the Databricks platform, or EMR, or from other vendors, it's really powerful to handle streaming ingestion, machine learning, data transformations, large batch jobs, initial data investigation. I think it's a perfect solution for that, and can do many other things as well. Presto really excels at fast federated queries, where majority of the data will be in your data lake, but you may have data beyond that, right? And that high concurrency SQL queries, and then rapid investigation, and optionality, because you can, it's open source, you can deploy it anywhere you want. You can swap where the data is, and the end users may be still unaffected because they are really working with the semantic views on top of the real storage. And then, this data warehouse technologies like Snowflake or Teradata or Redshift, etc., are also important because they are really, really fast technologies. And they sort of run queries probably faster than anything in the open source, and can be a very powerful addition for some of the use cases, at the expense of, obviously, you have to load the data into them, right? And invest in that ETL process and have the data logged into that environment, right? And we feel like it's basically a great addition in the ecosystem. And with Presto, you can actually query them as if they were yet another data source. So we really see them as a complementary play in the market. And then, just broadly speaking, like if you're in the cloud data ecosystem, and this is example from the Azure, obviously, but similar pictures can be drawn for Google or for AWS. You have a lot of different technologies, different tools, and they play different roles. And where we see Presto fitting in is essentially sort of as this central point where you can access the data wherever it's stored, and Delta Lakes is a very important mechanism for storing vast amounts of data. You can leverage ADLS, S3, Google Cloud Storage, and then all the other sources, whether they are deployed in the cloud or actually still on-prem, and sometimes in other cloud environments as well. So we can sort of go beyond a single cloud to grab the data from wherever they are available, and then expose this to your BI SQL users, and make this really a powerful single point of access, rather than forcing you to load the data into one place before starting the queries. And then the way we advocate for Presto to be deployed is Kubernetes in most of the cases. We think that deployment platform just yields the best benefits in terms of auto-scaling, fault tolerance, and simplifying the operations overall. Is portable across clouds and on-prem, so that's very powerful as well. I'll chat more about this separately. So onto use cases, I think that's really important to understand how you want to apply those technologies in the real environment. So as I mentioned, the data is going to flow through different layers. Your IoT information may be ingested and streamed into your Databricks environment and stored in the ingestion layer of Delta Lake, and then it's getting refined through Spark jobs into the silver layer where it's already good for analytics, but not optimized for BI necessarily, right? That's why you have aggregate store and the gold layer for Delta Lake. And then if you try to consume this data at fast interactive speeds, Presto is really great addition to that. And because not all the data was stored in Delta, we can tap into Elastic, Snowflake, Postgres, and other sources to bring additional auxiliary data to sort of correlate information across and serve the BI users, right? So this is a perfect example how Databricks and Starburst can really be deployed together in one environment. And as I mentioned, you'll be operating in Databricks environment for the ingestion, transformations, modifying this, merging this data together, and creating those tables for Delta that will be then leveraged by additional compute layers, right? And Presto would just handle the query time data federation, really, right? So single point of access to all the sources. We believe the power of bringing your relational data as well as NoSQL weblogs and Delta Lake and other formats coming from object storage is really powerful, and then we'll apply security and all the additional rules so that your BI users are really only accessing what they are allowed to and can run queries across without worrying where the data is originally stored. Because you can obviously specify where the data is in Presto in your query, but you can also create views on top and hide that complexity from them. And this is really an example here how data consumption analytics layer is enabled by Presto and the BI tools, and then because of all the libraries, Python, R, Java, JDBC, ODBC, we can power pretty much every tool on the market. And then the sample query that I have here is actually showing you in detail how you can construct queries and point to exact tables stored in a specific data store, like this IoT data from Delta and customer data from Snowflake and the weblogs stored in Elastic, right? And in one query, I may arrive at analytics insights and correlations to, in this example, tell you all about the customer IoT events from that happened today, that were gathered today, but only for customers that were active on your website earlier this year, right? And basically aggregate this information and show you this is for this segment of your customers, this is how active their IoT devices are. So it just shows you the power of, like, you don't need to load all this data in one place and wait days and weeks for ETL. And you can run this query today and find out other interesting insights there that you should act on in your business. So with that, I thank you all for attending my presentation. I encourage you to start leveraging Presto in your architecture. We have a promotion right now where you can start using Delta Lake Reader right now and download this software and try leveraging the power of Presto and Delta together. Thank you very much.